So just by way of a welcome, hello everybody. My name's Jen Anderton. I am the co-founder of Prospect Change, and it's really great to have you here at lunchtime on our first webinar of 2026. We did webinars last year, and they were a really good success. And we met a lot of new people and had some really interesting conversations. So welcome. I hope you've got your lunch or a coffee with you. But yeah, really, really good to see you. Joining us today, we have our friends from Keyview. We've got Ben and Rupert. And we've also got the whole of the Prospect Change team here. So just really quickly by way of introduction, just name and role. Ruth, I'll just hand over to you quickly.
Thanks, Jen. Hi, everybody. So I'm Ruth Geddes, one of the co-founders of Prospect Change. Over to yourself, Dev.
Hi, I'm Dev, and I'm the Business and Product Support Officer. I hand it to Asha.
Hi, I'm Asha, and I'm the Social Media and Engagement Coordinator for Prospect Change. I'll hand over to Rupert.
There we go, just get my mic off mute. Hi, I'm Rupert Taylor, and I founded a business called Keyview, and that is a PPM tool. It's a PPM tool, but we've just joined another company through a merger called Alico.
Thank you. Ben?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name's Ben. I work for Keyview with Rupert, and I sit across account management and partnerships for the company.
Thanks very much, all. If we can move on to the next slide, Ruth, I'll do a little bit of an introduction on Prospect Change before Keyview also introduce themselves, and then we can move into the topic of today with Ruth. So Prospect Change was founded in 2022 by myself and Ruth. We are based in Yorkshire, if you can tell by the accent, in Bradford, and we support organisations in the setup, coordination, oversight and delivery of projects, programmes and portfolios of change. And as many of you will know, that is known as PMO, or Portfolio Management Office. Ruth and I have got backgrounds in operational management and PMO, mainly in financial services, but we've done a lot of work since 2022 across different industries. We set up Prospect Change with two missions in mind. One is to support organisations in the successful delivery of projects and programmes, saving them time and money. We believe that getting it right with a PMO means success for businesses. But we also noticed a gap, and that is in the educational space. And so we wanted to make sure that we put PMO on the educational map, professionalising its value and ensuring it's recognised as a vital enabler for success. And we do that by becoming employer partners with local colleges. So those are two of our two missions for Prospect Change. I'll hand over to, a little bit more about our services. We've shaped our services into three different offerings. PMO as a service, so kind of doing it for you. So going into businesses, standing up PMOs, helping fix PMOs. We have PMO Partner, which is a do it with you, hand holding, retained service, offering PMO support. And then we've got something really new and exciting, which is a PMO in a box, a ready to deploy framework for projects, programs and for portfolios, saving people all that time creating structures, methodologies, templates. We've done it, we've been there, we know what works, we know what doesn't. And so we've created a PMO in a box for you guys. So that's our three services.
Thanks, Jen. And we'll hand over to Rupert or Ben. Do you want to give a bit of an update about Keyview and how that fits into the Alico model?
Yeah, just a little bit about Keyview and myself. So I've been involved in the delivery of business transformation and projects, programs and portfolios for about 30 years. And therefore, I've sort of been into many situations in different types of companies that have different types of challenges around portfolio management. And I have to say, this challenge comes up all the time. There's three or four of them that come up every single time I sit down with a client. And I can almost say that for 100% of the scenarios. One of them is about portfolio prioritization. One of them is about resource management and capacity planning. One of them is about dependency mapping across portfolios. And one of them is about benefit realization tracking, all of which are far, far, far more complicated than they seem on the face of it. And therefore, I think what I would hope that I bring to the party is essentially a very wide-ranging view of different ways of doing things, and the experience of seeing scenarios that have worked and that don't work. We were acquired a few weeks ago now by a company called Alico, and that means that our product, which is called KeyView Perform, which some of you know, is essentially now, for the first time, very excitingly from our perspective, part of a family of products that are tools that can essentially solve problems within PMOs and portfolio management. Alico's been around for about 100 years. It has a product that competes with, you might have heard of P6, which is very much a construction-focused PPM tool, very expensive and very good. But Alico have a product that's been competing with P6 for the last 40, 30 years, a product called Power Project, Asta Power Project. And they also have resource management modules and various different tools for different scenarios. So yeah, we're excited about that marriage, so to speak.
Fabulous, and must say congratulations on that as well. Prospect Change has really enjoyed partnering with KeyView, and we continue to look forward to that relationship evolving and growing even further now that we can partner on a number of PPM tools.
Absolutely.
So yes, very excited to do this webinar together. I think it gives a really holistic end-to-end overview of portfolio prioritization and management. So thanks, guys. Right, so what are we here to talk about today? So as Rupert said, this is one of the biggest challenges that organisations face, that PMOs face, and it's the successful prioritisation of a portfolio, i.e. what's coming in it and what's coming out of it. So these are the main areas we're going to talk about today. I want us all to be on the same page, first of all, when we're talking about portfolio. So I'm just going to spend a couple of moments talking about what do we mean when we say portfolio and when we refer to a PMO as a portfolio management office. And let's just make sure we're all on the same page then. We're going to pause and look at the challenges that a portfolio will face when effective prioritisation is not in place. We're then going to give you a really simple tool for effective prioritisation and then effective management of that portfolio once it's been effectively prioritised, and maintaining that prioritisation because things change once they get off that starting block. Then we're going to spend some time going through the tool. So we'll hand over to Rupert and Ben to take us all through that. And then I'd really like us to spend some time discussing it as a group and sharing some learnings. This is a very interactive session. We're really keen to learn from one another. There's a lot of experience on this call, and it's just fantastic if we can make the most of that. So I'm assuming, Dev, that the chat is open, that people are able to put comments in the chat, but do shout out. Amazing. Thank you so much. There's also a Q&A. If you do have any trouble with the chat, just bob it into the Q&A. As we go through, if you've got any thoughts, feel free to jot them down and raise them in the group discussion. Equally, feel free to put them live into the chat, and the team will respond to you in the chat as well. Because like I said, very, very keen to hear from your experience and hear your thoughts. And if we don't talk about something that's front of mind for you today regarding the prioritisation of the portfolio, raise it. We really want you to make sure you walk away from today with light bulb moments, with thoughts, with ideas that you can put into practice. So make sure you do vocalise if we don't touch on something that is a priority for you today. okay, what are we talking about when we say portfolio? So we use the word PMO all the time, and sometimes we're talking about that in the terms of a project management office, and sometimes it's a program management office. When we talk about project management office, that is the capability for fantastic project management. So it's tools, it's templates, it's reporting, it's governance, it's everything that is needed to successfully manage projects within an organisation. And of course, a programme can't be managed as just a big project. So a programme management office will be a framework that is set up, and often a temporary office that is set up specifically for the management of that particular programme of work, whether it be 12 months, 5 years or beyond. Once the programme has delivered, a programme management office closes down. So sometimes within an organisation, it might be an organisation that delivers predominantly projects, and then there'll be one programme of work, so they will stand up a programme management office. When we talk about portfolio, we bring together the project management capability, the programme management capability, and we bring all those projects and all those programs together into one portfolio of change in order to achieve strategic outcomes, whilst also maintaining operational and organisational baseline. So that's your keeping the lights on stuff. And the critical thing here is your measure of success. So you can measure the success of your projects and your programs, you can measure success of portfolio, and you can measure success and direction of strategy, and also operational achievement and operational baseline. So that is, here you've got two key takeaways before we go into more detail. So please make sure you make a note of these, because I think this is when many PMOs will struggle. Is number one, you need to be managing your projects and your programs collectively as one portfolio of change, and that portfolio collectively must be driving forward strategy, so growth, and it must be driving forward the change that has to happen to keep the lights on. Now, this is when the biggest disconnect can happen, and when the first challenge around portfolio prioritisation can take place. So a PMO may have a fantastic PMO capability, portfolio management capability, and it might be great at managing projects and programs. But if it's not connected to organisational direction, i.e. what needs to happen to keep the lights on, and where are we going as an organisation from a strategic perspective, prioritisation becomes near on impossible, because you can't prioritise against anything because you're not connected to ultimate outcomes beyond a project or a programme outcome. So takeaway number one, it has to be managed as a portfolio, and number two, that portfolio must be connected to strategic growth and keeping the lights on. So let's pause for a moment and just delve a little bit deeper into those two pipelines and perspectives. Because if you find that this is a disconnect in your organisation, this is conversations that need to start happening in order to start effectively prioritising a portfolio. So keeping the lights on, that's anything that must happen to stay compliant and operational. It's things like changes off the back of regulation and legislation. So that's your legislative projects. You might identify a risk or compliance failure within an organisation, or a risk and compliance, a compliance risk, in which case there might be a project to fix that. There could be system upgrades or even system fixes and process fixes. So it's anything that keeps the lights on. It keeps the organisation performing at a baseline level. The measure of success is that the organisation stays stable and that risk is controlled. The rule being, so when you're prioritising based on keeping the lights on, is that the work protects the organisation. It's not judged on growth. So it's okay for projects to exist on a portfolio that are not driving forward strategy. In fact, they should be on the portfolio, but under a specific pipeline, which in this case we'll refer to as pipeline 1. The next is pipeline 2, and this is your strategic growth. It's an exciting channel. It's the one that can grow arms and legs and get completely carried away with, and therefore it must be disciplined. This is things like your digital transformation, new products and services, a target operating model, efficiency programs. A measure of success is strategy is defined and delivered with outcomes and benefits realised that are in line with growth. And if it's not moving the strategy forward, if the project isn't connecting to the strategy, it doesn't belong on pipeline 2. Now, it's very important to have these two perspectives and these two pipelines within your organisation, because if not, organisations will find themselves pulling away from strategy and focusing on the BAU stuff, which we're seeing more and more of. How do we keep our heads above water? How do we just tread water and we're running to stay still? But what are the things we need to do in such a challenging climate that we find ourselves in now just to maintain baseline? Now, the problem with that, although it's much needed, but that on its own is not sufficient to sustain an organisation, because competitors that invest in strategy will, of course, overtake. So even though these projects will maintain baseline, you will still see revenue drop. And so you will pull back without strategy as competitors overtake. And you can't only invest in strategic because an organisation might have the most amazing strategy and deliver in line with that. But in doing so, neglect the BAU stuff, the keeping the lights on, because that's not the focus. The focus is this new direction we're travelling in. And as a result, the strategy is realised, but that foundational stuff wasn't maintained. So the foundation is now damaged and broken, and the strategy outcomes are not as strong as they should have been because the foundation has been allowed to rot and become neglected. So it's very, very important, takeaway number 2, that a portfolio has two perspectives. Pipeline 1, keeping the lights on. Pipeline 2, strategic growth. And that projects that enter the portfolio enter because they tick a box of either pipeline 1 or pipeline 2. A lot of these, I think, will resonate if you're on the call today. So these are the challenges that a portfolio faces if it's not effectively prioritising. So how does it feel to be in an organisation and working within a portfolio that doesn't prioritise? And I will say, if you're experiencing a challenge that we don't touch on this slide or talk about, add it to the chat or make a note of it so we can discuss it in the group session later. Let's bring all these up. Firefighting becomes the default way of working. So rather than it feeling like you are running a portfolio that is calm, that is under control, that you have well structured, you are just constantly batting things out of the way. And it's whichever seems like the biggest issue, the biggest concern, the biggest project right now, that's what we're focusing on. And everything else gets neglected and doesn't get the oversight it needs in the meantime. It's not a nice place to be when you're firefighting. It's a very stressful environment to work in, and very demoralizing as well. The loudest voices get priority, not the highest valued work. This is one of the biggest challenges, I think, in my experience, I have seen portfolios struggle with. They have a prioritisation framework. It's connected to strategy and keeping the lights on, but there's a particularly vocal senior leader in an organisation, and somehow they're able to bypass the processes and allowed to do that. Change never feels fully embedded or done. So projects deliver, but once they close down, oversight is lost. And that project, although project delivers, change isn't realised. Outcomes aren't effectively realised. Benefits are not realised. It feels like the PMO lets go of them too soon. Funding is spread too thin across too many priorities. So you might have the right stuff on the portfolio, it feels like, but there's not enough money to go around. Not enough people, skills, or capacity to deliver what is approved. So again, you might have the right stuff on there. It feels like it might all be connected to the right pipeline, but for some reason it feels like you've not got the right people, or you've not got enough of the right people. Dependencies are missed until they become problems, so they become issues. So you're not able to articulate which projects contribute to other projects on the portfolio until the house of cards comes crashing down, or the dominoes fall. Senior leaders seem disconnected from the reality of delivery. You can see this when it's a just get it done. just focus on it, just make it happen without truly understanding what's needed in order to make that happen, which results in not enough money, not enough people, firefighting. Decisions are reactive, not strategic, and no single trusted view of what is really in flight. And those two very much go hand in hand. So you've got a list of projects on a portfolio, but you don't really truly understand how they're contributing to wider outcomes. So what do we do about that? Let's move on to how we effectively prioritise a portfolio. Now, when it comes to quantifying prioritisation, that will vary organisation to organisation. So in the next slide after this, we will give some suggestions on how you quantify, but measures are going to be different. So for example, when we talk about strategic pipeline, you might have strategic objectives as your key measures. When we talk about the keeping the lights on, the operational baseline, you may have your key performance indicators, your KPIs, or you might have completely different measures altogether. So how you quantify will vary, but the principles of how to prioritise are the same. And this is a clever framework that hopefully you shouldn't forget. It's a prioritisation framework called Priority. So it's an acronym to help direct the principles by which you prioritise a framework. P, purpose. Is this clearly linked to strategy outcomes or growth priorities? That goes right back to what I said a moment ago, right at the beginning. Is this actually, what is the purpose of what we're trying to deliver here? Is this actually contributing towards strategy? Is it contributing towards keeping the lights on? And how? What is the return? What value will this deliver? That return on investment. And again, this is something that seems to be just drifting away from change and projects, is return on investment. Organisations are less and less seeing projects as investment initiatives and more delivering change based on the budget that they have in any financial year, rather than seeing this as we invest because in 5 years' time, this will be the return. So what is the value that will be delivered as a result of this? Whether it's financial, operational, is it going to increase revenue? Is it going to reduce risk? Is it going to increase the number of customers that we have? And how does that link through to the measures, the strategic measures? Let's call them strategic objectives or KPIs for the sake of argument. And what is the impact that this will have? Is it high impact? Is the outcome significant? Or will it just create more activity? Is it a change of process that makes it a little bit easier, but it actually doesn't change outcomes? What is the genuine impact of the outcomes that will be delivered? And ownership. Is there a named sponsor who will own the outcomes, not just somebody who's responsible for the delivery of it? Readiness. This is an important one. Is the organisation actually ready to absorb this change? Because it might be a fantastic idea that's going to bring brilliant value, but there's too much happening right now, so it needs to be paused for 6 months, 12 months. So is the organisation truly ready to receive this, both behaviourally, culturally, but also process-wise as well? Investment. Linking in with return. Is the cost proportionate to the value and affordable within constraints? The business case, isn't it? So do the benefits outweigh the cost? Is the return higher than the investment? Timing. What do we have on now? Is the timing right? What's the dependencies? What's the delivery load? What else is on the portfolio? Might be a fantastic idea, but it's going to stretch us too thin when it comes to actual delivery. Might pass the readiness assessment, but we can't deliver it. We've not got the right people. Which leads us on to the final one, capability, capacity. Asking the question, you can deliver. Can you deliver this and can you do it well? Or do you have to go back to the investment and bring in more people? And what does that do to your return on investment? So these are questions that need to be asked prior to a project entering a portfolio. You can call it ideation phase, concept registration, you could call it portfolio entry, but these are questions that must be asked before an initiative is accepted onto a portfolio of change. And in order to do that, you have to be able to quantify, and you have to have a governance structure in place to make the right decisions. A governance approach that is collaborative and championing those two outcomes when it comes to pipelines, championing the strategy. They know it inside out. They also know the organisation inside out when it comes to keeping the lights on and maintaining baseline. So those measures, strategic objectives, for example, and KPIs, for example, are championed within that governance structure, and they are determining which projects contribute to these outcomes and these measures. So here's an example, a very simple example of how you can quantify these questions. So what you would need in reality, in practical terms, is some form of form that would need to be completed pre-portfolio by the initiator, so that as a PMO function or capability or whatever you have in the form of a PMO is able to assess these questions and then mark them. So the concept will be put forward in way of a portfolio entry submission, for example, and then PMO capability, or the equivalent of a PMO capability that you have within your organisation, would do the initial marking and assessment of this and would liaise with the initiator in order to get it as strong an input and a realistic and transparent as input as possible. And then they would endorse it, or they would put their recommendations to a portfolio board to say, yes, we endorse, or actually our assessment of this is that it's not the right thing at this moment in time, but it is portfolio board that make that decision. So scores would be reviewed, scores being, for example, 1 very weak, 5 very strong, and anything in between. And the concept would be reviewed with an accept, reject, or submit for more information, submit back for more information. The total score would give a clear priority order when it comes to how it enters the portfolio, with low scoring items not achieving enter status. And if capacity is already full, only top scoring work proceeds. And importantly, the rescoring of initiatives on a portfolio on a regular basis, because it might be that something comes in very highly scored, but there's no capacity on the portfolio, and you might have to have a difficult conversation around stop, start, continue, because it might be the highest priority and therefore needs to be accepted, but at the cost of something else being paused and temporarily coming off the portfolio. Then you would probably need to have rules such as anything scoring 3 on anything such as purpose doesn't get on. If it doesn't score high on purpose, regardless of how good the return on investment might be, it's not linked to current priorities, so it wouldn't be accepted. Anything scoring lower than 3 on ownership, or you can deliver as well, for example, would not proceed. And anything scoring below 24, parked or rejected. This is an example because how you quantify is very personal within each organisation, and what you choose to prioritise varies in each organisation. But this framework here, this represents a set of principles that can be applied to every single organisation for effective prioritisation of a portfolio. So takeaway 3 is, remember the priority framework. Feel free to take a screenshot, but we will send the recording after the session. But what happens when you effectively prioritise, everything that's entering the portfolio is suitable, but then it doesn't get effectively managed once it enters the portfolio? All that work that you've put in to effectively prioritise ultimately goes to waste if the portfolio itself then isn't effectively managed. Now, we're not going to turn this webinar into how to effectively manage a portfolio, because that's a whole other discussion, but it's very important that we touch on this in order to make sure this is on your radar as very important. So again, I'm going to give you another acronym. in a moment. But what would it feel like if you didn't effectively manage a portfolio, even once it's effectively prioritised? Number one, priorities drift as new pressures and urgent asks appear. So at the point of bringing in certain projects onto a portfolio, you may have had no legislative pressures, for example. But then there's some legal changes, you need to make some changes internally, new projects come on, and other priorities start to drift as your focus moves. Capacity changes due to attrition, sickness, or hiring delays. So you accepted projects on the basis that you had sufficient resources, but suddenly you don't have sufficient resource anymore. BAU pressure pulls people away from strategic delivery. So what we can see is that pipeline one, that keeping the lights on pipeline, starts to grow arms and legs because of other pressures, and suddenly that starts to pull from strategic priorities. You've just got too much governance. Governance is too structured, and it starts to become a bottleneck. It creates governance fatigue, leading to shortcuts and weak decisions. Delivery risks are tolerated for too long without intervention, particularly if you're not reporting transparently on those risks or focusing specifically on them. Portfolio data becomes outdated and leaders lose confidence in reporting. So at the point of accepting a project, it was accurate, but time moves on, things change, and you're not giving that real-time portfolio reporting capability. Projects continue because of sunk cost, not because they still matter. I have seen this happen over and over again. So much money has been invested in a project that money continues to be invested in it rather than pulling the plug. And when it finally gets over the line, the outcomes and benefits are not there. Projects deliver but don't realise change. We talked about something similar a moment ago. So if change is often realised post-closure. It can be 6 months, 12 months, 24 months post-closure that the benefits actually are realised by an organisation. Oversight of those must continue even when the project has closed and the PM has stepped away. The portfolio should still maintain oversight, the PMO. Executive sponsorship weakens once delivery gets more intense. So the sponsor thinks they have capacity to continue to support, but then delivery gets intense, starts to be some issues. And when in reality, they just do not then have the time to commit to resolution and delivery when it gets more intense. So this is what you will start to feel, see, hear, experience if a portfolio isn't being effectively managed, even if it was prioritised effectively at the beginning. Here's the other acronym I promised, guardrail. So this is takeaway number 4. G, governance. Clear decision forums, roles and entry and exit criteria from ideation to closure and beyond. Unified oversight of the entire portfolio. So we refer to Portfolio Management Office often to really bring it to life as the air traffic control of change. So you imagine within the air traffic control at an airport, they are focusing on every single plane. They're focusing on the planes that are taking off, the planes that are landing, the planes that are travelling through their airspace that they have to accept and then hand over again. And whenever there's a problem, the weather gets poor, one of the planes get delayed, they have to understand the impact on the across the entire airspace. So what planes need to drop down a height, what planes need to increase a height, what planes need to speed up, what planes need to slow down in order to protect the airspace as a whole. And if you imagine every pilot is a project manager and the air traffic control is your PMO, they are providing, is that air traffic control or your portfolio management office, they are providing that unified, joined up oversight across the airspace, across the portfolio. Assurance, independent challenge on readiness, risk, value, the general health of the project. So is the project really ready for go live? Is the organisation ready to receive the project when it goes live? reporting, transparent, trusted, simple being the key word here, reporting that supports decisions, not just status updates. So not just a glorified to-do list of this is everything we've done this week or this fortnight or this month, but what do my stakeholders need to know? It's not an opportunity to showcase how busy somebody has been. It's these are the things that are slowing me down. These are the things that are concerning me and keeping me up at night. These are the big successes that we need to be keeping our eyes on. These are our success measures. This is what success will look like if we achieve the next activities over this 4 weeks, for example. These are the decisions that we need to be made. And if we don't get these decisions, this is the impact. These are the blockers that need to be removed. It's reporting that keeps things moving forward. Delivery control. So active management of your plan, of risks, of capacity, of money, of benefits, of dependencies at project level, at program level, and rolled right up to portfolio level. Realization of benefits. So benefits are owned and tracked and realized post-closure. The project, as I said, doesn't just close down with benefits promised. It closes down with ongoing assurance and oversight of benefits until they reach the point of realization. Alignment. Continuous alignment to outcomes and measures. So that again takes us right back to the beginning of alignment to your pipeline 1, keeping the lights on, and your pipeline 2 strategy. Continuous alignment, because things move, things shift. It's why you have to rescore and reassess the portfolio on a regular basis. A really good time to do that is when a project is going through a particular gateway, or any gateway. So when a project is moving from one life cycle to another, and it should go through at that point some form of quality assurance check, rescore the project. Make sure it's still coming out with the same scoring from a priority point of view as it was when it first entered the portfolio. If you do that for every project as it goes through a gate, your portfolio itself will remain aligned. Investment management. So funding is well allocated and it's protected and it's balanced quantifiably through evidence and return. And finally, life cycle ownership. There is ownership from concept to prioritisation, delivery, closure, and handover into BAU for benefit realisation. A great role for that is your business lead. So you've got your sponsor, ultimately accountable, but then someone on the ground that can see it from concept or ideation right through to realisation. So that's your takeaway for your guardrail framework. Before I hand over to Rupert and to Ben, I'm just going to re-emphasise your 4 takeaways from what we've talked about so far. You must have within your pipelines, within your portfolio, 2 pipelines of change. Maintain, so keeping the lights on. What projects will keep us at a baseline position? And 2, strategic. What projects are delivered to strategy, are connected, to strategy? And how is that strategy driving us forward? And then takeaway number 2, your measures of success. You can measure what success looks like from keeping the lights on, your KPIs, for example. You can measure success from your strategy, strategic objectives, for example. You're measuring the success of your projects, return on investment, etc. And your portfolio has overall measures of success that connect the 2. Takeaway 3, your priority framework. Takeaway 4, your guardrail framework for managing your portfolio after you've effectively prioritised. Rupert, I'm going to hand over to yourself. I'm assuming I will come off of share, and then you may want to share the tool. And once we've done this, I'm looking forward to opening up for group discussion and hearing everybody's thoughts and learnings.
Thanks, Ruth. Yeah, no, I absolutely will. and we'll have a look at the tool. But I thought actually, just to sort of kick off, it would be worth giving you some observations just from what you've just gone through, and a sort of experience of the various different companies I've worked with over the years. I think what's interesting is, as a framework, I think that framework is as good as anything I've seen. It's just a logical, well-structured framework for managing the sort of the portfolio prioritization approach. What I've sort of, when I started working in change about 35 years ago, I was sort of talking to various different and involved with various different customers. And the thing that I always sort of was slightly amazed by is no matter how big they were, so the Vodafones, the Skies, the British Gas, big organisations, and medium-sized organisations, they tended to all be from a mixed level of maturity when it came to project delivery. They all did. I naively thought that if I went into Vodafone, big company, lots of cash, that they would be a mature project delivery organisation. But actually, when you look at the whole portfolio, which is what we're talking about, there's an awful lot of people who are running projects across these organisations who are a low level of project maturity. They haven't done even the Prince 2 courses or course, and they don't really sort of come from a background of Gantt charts, etc. They're just driving delivery. And that permeates across the whole of these organisations. And the reason that's important and relevant to prioritisation is it is one thing having a really good framework, like Ruth has just outlined, and that is clearly absolutely key. But it has to go in line with a maturity or a level of maturity that can actually cope with that. And it also has to go with a level of maturity that enables the leadership team, particularly, to follow the rules, so to speak, as you've outlined them. So I was doing an assessment. I am doing an assessment at the moment for a PMO in a client, a portfolio office. And I was actually in there this morning, and we were talking about various different things. But the biggest issue they have is that when it comes to it, no matter how good the framework is, there are people in the leadership team who are just cutting across and cutting through all of it and saying, well, I'm going to have my project on the roadmap. So it's your example of the person that shouts loudest getting their projects on the roadmap, the person that is in the position getting their projects on the roadmap. So I think there's a fundamental challenge that we have as a profession, which is how do we change that? How do we actually get people within leadership positions to really genuinely engage with what this is all about? And sometimes I think people in leadership positions, probably I normally my assessment is that about 8 out of 10 members of the board, the operating board, don't really care that much about project management approaches. They're just more interested in get it done. So there's a JFDI culture in many organizations.
Yeah.
And release the benefits. Just get me to the benefits as quickly as you can. That's all I'm interested in. I'm not interested in life cycles and gatings and etc. Not all of them, but a proportion. But unfortunately, that proportion is normally where this lack of discipline comes in terms of following the rules. And so I think a really key question is, how do we get them on board? How do we get them operating in the right way so that however good your framework is, it's going to land, and it's going to land effectively because people are playing by the rules. And I think base one, as I said to my client this morning, is it's very well me doing an assessment of their PMO and how effective their PMO is. But actually, we need to be sitting in front of the chief executive and saying, how important is this to you? Because if it's important to you that you achieve your strategic ambitions and your strategic goals, then we need you to sit up in front of the business and in front of your team and say, look into the whites of my eyes, this matters. And I expect you to play by the rules of the game. And what I expect from the PMO is that you don't develop rules that are too complicated. You develop rules that we can manage and are straightforward and are simple to operate with, and cut through bureaucracy as opposed to creating bureaucracy. So it's a kind of slightly different angle, which might feed some of the Q&A, but it's really, it's summarizing however good your framework is. And I really think that was good, Ruth. I really honestly, genuinely haven't seen that many that are any better than that. It was really good. But however good it is, how do you get the organization and particularly the leadership standing behind your framework and sponsoring it and championing it and making it happen? And I've got some thoughts on that, but that's essentially where we are. So that having been said, I'm not going to spend long sort of doing a demo of our product, but I'm going to tell you, essentially show you, and this fits in with your framework, Ruth, how we approach in Perform. And I'm not talking about the other PPM products that we've now got. I'm just sort of focusing on Perform at this stage. So we split portfolio management up into 3 key areas. You have your ideation, your ideas. It's what we're calling roadmap. And what we mean by that in here is these are contenders to get on the roadmap. This is where your contenders are. Then you've got your portfolio, your live portfolio, which is what's in delivery. And then you've got sub-portfolios, because lots of organizations have multiple portfolios. And so you need to look at them in different ways at different times. So the bit we're really interested in is this, the ideation area. And just to sort of dovetail into your framework, Ruth, that you were going through, each of these columns are essentially the sort of questions that you were outlining in your framework. So the level of impact in here, I've actually sorted this by priority score. So they've already gone through a prioritization matrix, which is looking at benefit value, cost, impact on the organization, level of difficulty, strategic alignment, etc. And that score, so this one's got a score of 62. In fact, I'd probably go the other way around and go from high to low, but it gives you an idea as to how it works. And we've got on here the ability then to filter by different sponsor group or by impacted areas or estimated cost. So we can filter on, I want to see everything with an estimated cost that is greater than or equal to X, whatever it might be, and we may kick those out. T-shirt size would be resourcing, strategic goals. So which of the strategic ambitions is this actually genuinely hitting? What type of benefits are they? A lot of the things that you had on your list here, Ruth. And this is configurable. So you configure this to your environment. And what that then does is does 2 things. It creates a list of all of those different questions, a 1-page overview for each of the ideas that you can take into an investment committee and allow them to discuss in order to take decisions on what moves forwards, what is put on hold and what is rejected. And if they particularly want to then look at the ideation by different driver, you can get some outputs that say, well, look, we want to look at everything that is essentially, we're going through a tough time. We need to look at all the ideas that are related to cost reduction and that are going to be implementable within this financial year. So how can we précis the list and bring it back to the stuff that really matters? But I would, and then we might say, well, how long is that likely to, hang on, let me just get back in here. How long is that likely to take? Now, all that having been said, what I feel is that, let me just get rid of this, stop sharing. What I feel is that it comes back to this reliance on having the right setup and leadership around the prioritization process in order to enable it to work. And as I said to the client I was working with this morning, you can't develop your PMO to solve this problem. It's wider than that. You need to look at the organization, the culture within the organization, the leadership across the organization in order to solve the problem, because the two need to work in hand. And yeah, as I say, I mean, our tool is one thing, but actually in many ways it's more interesting, I think, is how you connect an organization to this ambition to prioritize effectively from top to bottom.
Thanks, Rupert. Yeah, I absolutely agree. And that very first slide, that really simple one, it says projects and programs left-hand side, portfolio in the middle, because you can have the best portfolio management office going in terms of process and framework, etc. But if it's not connected to organizational outcomes and the organization aren't supporting its connection, you're banging your head against a brick wall.
And your point on maturity, we see that so much, Rupert, so much in organisation. These are really, quite often, really large organisations and there's nothing wrong with Excel. I'm a fan of Excel, but Excel is the tool that of choice to run everything that they're using. And then there's no kind of framework or support or even, anybody in roles of PMO in the organisation. They've just got project managers, so to speak. So but wholeheartedly agreed with all that discussion you had at the start. Yeah, really good point.
I think, Jen, I mean, we don't always help ourselves in our profession. And I think it's worth sometimes looking in the mirror and saying, how can we be more effective in what we're trying to achieve? But I mean, I see RFPs coming out from organisations for tools, which is why I haven't spent a lot of time on the tool, because actually it's probably the least important part. Of course it's important, but it's not going to solve the problem. There's more of a cultural issue and organisational, systemic organisational issue. But I see RFPs coming out for tools, looking at sort of requirements that are so complicated if you really understand what you're trying to achieve. And that would include things like capacity planning and resource management and dependency mapping across portfolios, etc. It's just not straightforward, and yet they tend to be deciding factors in tender processes, which often then, unfortunately, we were talking about an example earlier on before the webinar did, but which unfortunately lead to low levels of adoption, low levels of value being generated from the tool, because they're not aligning the tool with the challenges at the organizational level. And I think that's a real opportunity for PMOs to be much more effective and deliver more value to their companies or organizations.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've reached the discussion point.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, keep us
you.
updated. Any other questions or thoughts before we close out today? No, we'll leave it there. I'll hand over to Dev. Dev's going to update you on the next webinar, but if you've got any questions, you know where we are. Really lovely to have seen you today.
Thank you, Ruth. Today we have talked about creating one front door, a clear way for work to enter. But once work is inside, how do you make sure nothing important stays hidden? How to ensure risks, assumptions, issues, and dependencies are visible early enough to act on? I'd encourage you guys to reflect on it. And we will pick this discussion on our next session, which is going to happen on the 15th of April, on our next webinar called Making RAID Work for You. If you have any questions about today's webinar and the next webinar, feel free to contact the Prospect Change team. And if you haven't done it yet, please follow Prospect Change and the KeyView Limited LinkedIn page, and feel free to connect with the panel, myself, Jen, Ruth, Rupert, Ben, and Asha. Thank you so much, guys. Thank you for joining in.